Hi, everyone, and welcome once again to a special live episode of the Ethicast, coming to you from the 16th Annual Global Ethics Summit here in Atlanta, Georgia, and virtually around the world. I am especially excited because we have a wonderful guest with us today. We have David Newman, partner at Morrison Foerster. David is the co-chair of MoFo's National Security and Crisis Management Practices. He draws upon his deep experience in private practice and as a senior U.S. Department of Justice and White House official to represent clients in high-stakes matters involving national security, geopolitical risk, emerging technology, and crisis management. In other words, nothing serious. David, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So my first question is, in February, at the very start of her tenure, Attorney General Bondi issued a series of memos, including memos directing prosecutors to shift their focus from criminal enforcement of foreign influence schemes over to prosecuting companies suspected of making payments to a series of cartels that were recently designated by the U.S. as foreign terrorist organizations. As a result, many have examined the national security enforcement landscape, including yourself, and have predicted that we'll see a rise in prosecutions for, quote, material support of terrorism involving support and assistance to cartels and transnational criminal organizations. Do you see a corporate enforcement takeaway for this work?
Thank you for having me. I do see a significant takeaway for companies. The material support for terrorism statute, 18 USC 2339B, is a very powerful statute. In many respects, it sweeps broader and with more harshness than even OFAC designations. It has a broader jurisdictional reach. It has harsher penalties, and it doesn't have the same finely tuned licensing scheme that exists under OFAC sanctions. And we saw how powerful that tool can be in cases that were brought when I was at DOJ, such as the Lafarge matter involving a French cement company that was ultimately forced to plead guilty to terrorism. A $778 million penalty in connection with paying what amounted to kind of protection money to keep operating in Syria to ISIS. So I think for companies, the takeaway is you really need to look at your compliance programs, especially in Latin America. Even things that were risk-based that you were doing with respect to OFAC designations, they may not work or be enough for the terrorism designations. And also, I just think there's going to be so much intensive focus on this area in particular as something that authorizes and informs enforcement discretion, that you would just be very well served to take another look at how you're interacting in areas that are at higher risk for this type of action.
Indeed. Now, in January of this year, while you were still in the government, the Department of Justice issued a 100-plus page final rule to restrict or prohibit the sale of or access to bulk U.S. sensitive data to interests in China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, and Cuba in the interest of protecting national security. The rule covers a broad range of data sets, from genomic information to things like geolocation and certain forms of personally identifiable information. And I understand it's set to take effect sometime in early April, but that date could possibly change. It's being overseen by your former division at the DOJ, the National Security Division. For many companies, the scope and complexity of that rule are still coming into focus. What are you seeing with regards to organizations complying with this rule, and with the rule's impact on their daily organizations? And I guess most importantly, what should companies be doing right now?
So the one sentence bumper sticker of that rule is you should know where your data is going, and you should know if it's going to China and what data that is. That I would say more than anything else was the animating principle behind that rule. As you mentioned, the rule was intended to bring companies into voluntary compliance. Although it is a DOJ program, I don't think in the first instance DOJ is going to be looking for enforcement, but it does carry some very significant risks for companies that are out of compliance. And in particular, the way the rule is structured, there is a very finely graduated level of thresholds for different kinds of data. So genomic data, which is among the most sensitive, 100 data sets is enough to implicate the rule, whereas for others, it could be 1,000, 10,000. They're set to orders of magnitude. So I think first and foremost, what companies need to do, they need to be aware of the rule, and they need to start making diligent efforts to get themselves into compliance. And that starts with knowing what data you are either selling or storing in China that meets the sensitivity thresholds and definitions under the rule, especially location data human genomic data and certain kinds of health and financial data, which I think are the core information we roll out. There's also a broader category of personal identifiers that is causing companies to have to look very closely at their practices.
Fantastic. So during your time in government, there was an increased focus across the U.S. government on using national security authorities to prevent sensitive and disruptive technology from falling into the wrong hands. The types of sensitive technology that were the focus of this effort weren't just military equipment, but also the semiconductors and advanced computing that powers the cutting edge of AI technology. Have you seen that focus continue in this new administration? And what is your advice for companies on how they might adjust their compliance approach and strategic thinking over the next few years, given the new regulatory environment and enforcement posture?
We have seen a significant continued focus on the risk of transfer of sensitive tech to China. You have seen continued cases being brought by an interagency group called the Disruptive Technology Strike Force, which began when I was in government, that brings together DOJ, Commerce, FBI, DHS, and others. You have seen in some of the America First investment executive orders and pronouncements a particular focus on the risk that foreign investment could lead to sensitive tech transfer in China. And more generally, I think you're seeing a very aggressive posture being taken with respect to China. So first and foremost, I think for companies that are in those industries, this is the right time to think very carefully about your export compliance program and to understand how powerful the tools are that can be brought to bear if there is a violation. In particular, as you saw, for example, with the $300 million resolution that BIS reached with Seagate in 2023. You know, BIS has a strict liability standard. I think historically, you know, going back a few years, they didn't bring those types of cases all that often. But I think what you're seeing now is an incredible amount of focus on trying to bring those cases as well as criminal cases from my former division involving violations of ECRA and other criminal statutes.
Indeed. Well, David, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for applying your really unique skill set and experience to these issues. These are complicated topics. Really appreciate the level and the depth of your insight. Where can people go to learn more?
You can come to Morrison Forster to our website. We have client alerts on all the topics we've just discussed and more. And I really appreciate the chance to talk with you today. And thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This has been another episode of the Ethicast, coming to you live from Atlanta, Georgia, and virtually around the world here at the 16th Annual Global Ethics Summit. I'm your host, Bill Coffin. Thank you so much for tuning in. We have plenty more great content coming for you, so stay tuned. Bye now.